Hey everyone, my name's Jade and my pronouns are they, them, she, her. And I am a PhD sociology candidate at York University, as well as a community organizer across the greater Tkaronto-Hamilton area, or GTHA, and Tri-City Guelph. And today I will be presenting on my project entitled A Political Activist Ethnography of Tkaronto-Based Food Justice Responses to COVID-19. Before I begin, I did want to describe what I look like for anyone who's blind or visually impaired. So I've also included descriptions of each of my presentation slides along with my script in the description box on YouTube, where the video is posted for this presentation. And regarding my appearance and my background, I am a light-skinned brown person who identifies as a non-binary woman. I have long wavy brown hair and I'm wearing a black and pink and white striped shirt. And behind me is a bluish white background and the couch that I'm sitting on, as well as the bottom of a painting that's on the wall behind me. So for my paper, I'm presenting on a project that is rooted in my experiences with co-founding the Tkaronto-based food justice group, the People's Pantry, or TPP, which is a Black and Brown, femme, trans, and queer-led mutual aid project that provides free home-cooked meals and grocery care packages to people across Southern Ontario, and which was founded in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So to begin, I'd like to give a brief introduction of the People's Pantry, and particularly how we began. So the People's Pantry actually started with a Facebook post, and the post was made by two of our co-founders, Ellie and Yan, and it was posted on March 14th, 2020, where Ellie wrote the following, quote, "Hello, everyone. If you're unable to leave the house for safety reasons or are just in need of food, my partner and I have been making meals and dropping off in Toronto. We've been doing it for close friends, but want to open it up to others, prioritizing folks who are immune compromised, living with a disability, and or my queer trans BIPOC," end quote. So the first time that I saw this post, I was in the car with my partner as they drove us to my grandma's house to commemorate the 10-year death anniversary of my grandfather. My grandma had originally planned to hold the event in January 18th when my grandfather had passed away, but there was a snowstorm that weekend, so she postponed the event until his birthday, which is March 14th. This also just happened to be the exact moment in which the COVID-19 pandemic struck Canada. I remember telling my partner that I saw Ellie's post and that I wanted to do the same thing for people in and near the city in which we live, which is Burlington, Ontario. And this city is located at the southwest outskirts of the GTHA. The next day, I made a similar Facebook post, which is currently posted on the slide that's on the screen. And it was very similar to Ellie's, just offering food to a different region in the GTHA. So one of our other co-founders, Andrea, also saw Ellie and Yan's post and decided to join them in cooking for people in Tkaronto. Then they quickly brought on Michelle and Paul, our two remaining co-founders. Soon the six of us were individually buying, preparing, and delivering home-cooked meals and groceries to various nearby families. After a couple of weeks, we consolidated our efforts forming the People's Pantry, a Toronto-based community meal program providing home-cooked meals and grocery care packages to people living in or near the GTHA who have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the span of April, our initiative grew rapidly, eventually reaching more than 500 volunteers, serving more than 30,000 people and raising over $200,000 in funds. It is from my experiences with the TPP, particularly during the first 2 years of my inception, that this project is based, and where I focus my analysis. Specifically, I adopt a political activist ethnography framework to examine my firsthand experiences with the People's Pantry, and in so doing, offer some insights into the ebbs and flows of local food justice responses to COVID-19. From here, I begin to explore two main points. First, the pivotal role that queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Tkaronto have played in addressing their surmounting food crisis following the pandemic, and two, the simultaneous co-optation of mutual aid during COVID-19 or following COVID-19, and the subsequent barriers that this has posed to present and future food justice activists. I would also like to note that although I've written a few chapters and articles on the People's Pantry already, the specific project is a work in progress, and the primary aim of my presentation today is to get helpful and critical feedback about the direction and construction of the project, so really any input is appreciated. So regarding my theory methodology, I use political activist ethnography, or PAE, which draws on the insider knowledge of community activists to theorize the social world. Developed by Toronto-Based activist George Smith, PAE challenges the standard economy between theory and praxis that uses the activities of community organizers to investigate the larger structures that shape their work. PAE specifically considers how activist work is directed through text-mediated discourses, such as media reports, legislation, internal agency memoranda, and more recently, new age media. A point of analysis of PAE is to explore these text-mediated discourses and to use them to map out the resistance struggles faced by frontline and grassroots organizers, while also using these organizers' everyday lived experiences to locate and analyze these texts. So in the case of my project, there are two types of texts that I want to explore. The first falls in line more with contemporary adaptations of PAE, which account for the changing nature of tech and media since Smith first conceptualized this framework. And they are social media and online news coverage. And then the second is more traditional to the paradigm, which is the People's Pantry's internal memoranda. First, for my project, I turned to community-produced media content, particularly social media posts, blogs, and webinars produced by local queer, trans, BIPOC activists to document their food justice responses to COVID-19. My reason for this is quite simple. It's to demonstrate what I and other queer, trans, BIPOC activists know and have already written much about, that queer, trans, BIPOC lead and continue to lead food justice responses to COVID-19 in Tkaronto, as well as the GTA and the surrounding areas. As a member of this community, I have organically produced, consumed, and shared these resources, not only making me familiar with them and their existence, but of the sociological insight contained within them. In analyzing this material, my primary goal is to highlight that mutual aid following COVID was just an extension of the longstanding history of queer, trans, BIPOC, especially locally, doing mutual aid against a white settler state and capitalist system that leaves many people to die and suffer. Then for the news coverage element of my analysis, I will examine online open access news articles on food insecurity in the first year of the pandemic, featuring local queer, trans, BIPOC groups and activists to develop a survey of public representations of our work, exploring whether they line up with the media content we ourselves were and are continuing to produce, particularly regarding our political aims and goals. I have chosen this text-mediated discourse based on my experience as a queer, trans, BIPOC food justice organizer who was frequently interviewed at the start of the pandemic, and also as someone within the community that's bore witness to the rise of such coverage since COVID, especially in Tkaronto. Based on my experience, I believe that early public representations of our work glamorized and celebrated our politics, specifically the idea of food justice and doing mutual aid, or solidarity, not charity, but that these acts were ultimately shallow and fleeting. Particularly, I suspect that early massive public support and representations of our work, while positive, were more about making society feel good in the wake of a public crisis, and that news outlets merely used our politics for rhetorical and clickbait purposes. All without, our message actually sinking in and having a strong and long-lasting impact. I believe that when examined against the more grassroots social media depictions of queer, trans, BIPOC, and food justice responses to COVID, news coverage footage of these same things will highlight that what I and many others have already experienced firsthand, that there has been a co-optation of mutual aid following the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, I feel that the initial public celebration of our work actually helped to promote both performative activism and profitization among mutual aid and queer, trans, BIPOC food justice spaces that have ultimately had pretty insidious impacts on the work that we're doing. So at the start of the pandemic, Canadians rallied to support mutual aid groups in quite big numbers. However, as the pandemic persisted, the public's interest in food justice wavered, and so too did their support of mutual aid. Although typical of community supports formed after disasters, this has had a negative impact on local queer, trans, BIPOC sites of food justice organizing. Most newcomers either quickly withdrew from such organizing or stayed and reverted to the same charity practices that mutual aid opposes. In turn, many queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color groups who had gained mass momentum right after COVID-19, like the People's Pantry, started struggling a year or two into the pandemic, either due to lack of funds or because of heightened internal conflicts. Most troublesome is that food insecurity only worsened among the marginalized groups who had come to depend on these initiatives for support. This then raises the question of what will happen to local food justice movements in the years succeeding COVID-19 and how these changes will affect the amassing food crisis among poor, disabled, racialized, migrant, and Indigenous communities. So from here, I turn to the People's Pantry's internal memorandum, hoping to identify the inner workings of local food justice movements, specifically following COVID. Since the People's Pantry was the only local group to form simultaneous to the first provincial lockdown and has many community partners, our internal memorandum offers excellent insight into the evolution of local sites of food justice during COVID-19. I also have full access to these resources as a co-founder. The reasons I turn to the People's Pantry's internal memorandum is the same reason I know that mutual aid has been co-opted since COVID. The People's Pantry, a group founded by and for queer, trans, and feminist Black and Brown community organizers, was itself solely co-opted, eventually becoming overrun with white professional volunteers who meant well, but who joined the group for the wrong reasons and could not help but to bring charity practices into our space once COVID-19 no longer felt like a crisis to them. The People's Pantry's co-optation is actually well documented, not only by me, but by the People's Pantries writ large. So for example, in November 2021, we announced our temporary closure, releasing the statement that you'll now find on the screen or linked in the description. Within the statement, the group's co-founders, me included, detailed why the People's Pantry wanted to restructure our processes and more specifically, how we had moved away from our initial commitment to do mutual aid. We wrote that the People's Pantry had, quote, shifted from a by and for queer, trans, BIPOC mutual aid group to a nonprofit model of charity run by white professionals with white professional politics. We believe this has shifted us away from solidarity and closer to the very elitist and racist charity models we initially set out to challenge, end quote. Importantly, these challenges and our closure were particular to our Tkaronto group, our sister initiative, which covers all requests outside of the city, ranging from Mississauga to Tri-Cities Guelph, has remained a space of solidarity and is still thriving and open today with the help of a small community of truly wonderful volunteers. Of note, however, is that our Tkaronto group has still yet to fully reopen since our closure, with no clear pathway towards doing so. Although we have been able to provide grocery bundles in partnership with Food Share Toronto, we have remained unable to do so with frequency, in large part due to a lack of funding and volunteer support, and still have not been able to reopen the city's meal program. Relatedly, many of our white volunteers were offended by our public statement and as a result left the group, despite the fact that the non-white volunteers in the People's Pantry had been enduring their rhetorical violence and exploitation for months prior to the statement's release, and had expressed these concerns multiple times. It was not until we made the public statement actively holding them accountable that anything really started to change. So despite not having fully conducted my analysis yet, my lived experiences as a political activist ethnographer, which are the same experiences that led me to this project and my text media discourses of inquiry, have already revealed to me a few challenges and corresponding best practices for future queer, trans, BIPOC, and food justice activists to consider. First is that crises do not equal solidarity, and that longtime/grassroots community organizers need to be highly conscious of those who join movements in response to crises and catastrophe. To be clear, I don't think we need to or should deny this support. Rather, I think we need to actively plan for most of these folks to leave our community once the crisis feels, at least to them, to have ended, and then recognize that those who stay will probably revert to their old politics and charity mindsets, and that this is something we'll have to deal with. Second, it is more important to invest in sustainable community strategies and infrastructure than public outreach and media coverage. Not only are media interviews rather extrapolative, violent, violating, and flattening for the interviewee and the organization they represent, but they don't give that much support. Yes, donations and volunteers can increase following news coverage, and this can be helpful. But even ethics aside, and from a purely cost-benefit analysis, I believe that we are able to do more and better work and get more and better support if we put most of our energy into strengthening our core and community. In so doing, treat media outreach and engagement as secondary and more optional, because a lot of the times the volunteer and donations we get following news coverage really isn't that substantial. So third, and lastly, at least for now, for kind of suggested best practices, is that queer, trans, BIPOC organizers should not only plan around, but be actively weary of white activists, period. Honestly, this is a lesson I already learned long ago in academia and in my personal life, but had to relearn in the context of the People's Pantry and community organizing. I'm not suggesting that white people can't act in solidarity. A few can, but if growing up and working around whiteness my whole life has taught me anything, it is that most white people don't act in solidarity. And trying to get them to when doing community work is a waste of our time and thus our time and energy, and thus our resources. Well-intended white volunteers did so much damage to the People's Pantry in Tkaronto, not only structurally and infrastructurally, but emotionally and spiritually. The sheer level of burnout alone that they caused non-white volunteers was instrumental, specifically in our closure. Being wary of white folks is the only effective way I've learned to ward off this type of burnout, and it's something I forgot with the People's Pantry. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't organize with white folks. Many of the volunteers at the Sisters Initiative, for instance, are white, and they are genuine and very legit. They are all people I truly trust. However, they are people who have demonstrated their trust through their work, through their active solidarity, through how they live their politics and respond to critique. We are not all in this together, and white and privileged folks who get that, and I mean truly get that, are the only ones we should hold space with for our health and for the health of our movements. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Have a great day.